Hey everyone, Rob here. We're back. It has been a moment. I apologize for the small gap in time, short little 8-week pause, but we're back to our regularly scheduled programming. We're going to see Jesus return to Galilee to continue his ministry with this group of disciples. We'll see him return to a more rural area compared to what we've seen so far in the trek through Samaria and Jerusalem with the Pharisees, to now see really the bulk of his ministry, or the beginning of the bulk of his ministry, which is not as outlined as significantly in John as the Synoptics, but still plays a huge part in our understanding of his ministry. Always, always, always want you to do this. Make sure you've read the verses we're going to go over, because you need to know what we're talking about. And then 2 versions. I've really explored some other versions lately. I usually kind of hype on the New King James and the NIV. That's great, or the ESV. NIV is great for that more readable version. I have I believe, Common English Bible, or CSB, CEB, one of those two. It's been very good to read and approach, and of course, Amplified is always, while more challenging to read, very important. But regardless, so I've talked a little bit about where we're going, where we've been. Jesus took a detour through Samaria. We've discussed that in depth in the previous videos, and this passage of Scripture begins at the end of those 2 days as we focus back more to Galilee. It's what you imagine when you imagine the bulk of what Jesus accomplished on earth. This is a whitewashed picture, European picture, of course, but we're going to see Jesus discuss healing and what it is to be a follower of his, a prophet, a disciple, through the intercourse that leads to the healing of the nobleman's son of Capernaum. Before that, though, just important to realize that Jesus is not this solo disembodied figure, right? He is God, but his being God is not just testified through him, it is testified through the entire Word of God. So if we look back at Isaiah, which is full of prophecy that is fulfilled by Jesus, we see this short set of verses that talk about what will happen, right? The oppression of Jesus will occur through the core of the Judean elite in Jerusalem and Judea, and then Judah, I should say, and then he will go into Galilee, which was once of the Gentiles and now is mixed with Jews, and the people there who walked in darkness will see the light and see the revelation, right? Those who dwelt in the land of the shadow of death, upon them a light has shined. That is discussing how Jesus' ministry will take place, and it's exciting to look back and see how that goes. So, beginning in verse 43, now after 2 days he departed from there and went to Galilee. Again, we're talking about his interaction with the Samaritan woman. And then, very interesting, for Jesus himself testified that a prophet has no honor in his home country. We think about what's happened so far, and this makes sense, right? Jesus has left the area of Nazareth, Bethlehem, Jerusalem, where really a bulk of his life has been spent so far. And we even think back to what has been said in John. So Jesus, uniquely written in the Gospel of John, completes some sort of ministry in Judea and flees, though by divine choice, of course, back to Galilee through Samaria. He accomplishes a miraculous evangelistic action in Samaria. And that contrasts so strongly. He has no respect in Judea from the elite and has to go to Samaria and then Galilee to distance himself away from the elite of his country and Nazareth. There's no remark of him returning to Nazareth. And what a remarkable disgrace that is. How sad that is, that the ones that are closest to us, whether that's in our home, in our city, that's our best friends, when we get saved or when we try to accomplish the works of God, can often be the ones that are most judgmental of us and our attempt to evangelize, whether that's them or other people. Preconceptions of what a place is supposed to be, right? We see one of his disciples say, before he's his disciple, could a good thing come from Nazareth? What does this tell us about encouraging the ones closest to us? Are we being encouraging to believers around us who have these grand visions and dreams of what God can accomplish in their life? Or are we the most judgmental of what God has called them to do? Are we in any way contributing to a prophet, a disciple, a teacher, an evangelist having no honor in their community? We should never find ourselves in that situation. So when he came to Galilee, the Galileans received him, having seen all the things he did in Jerusalem at the feast, for they also had gone to the feast. Obviously, they had gone to Jerusalem for the Passover. Virtually all the Jews in the area would have been in Jerusalem at that time. And as we've discussed before, seeing the work of God is powerful and yet the least faith-inspiring thing we can encounter, as it is described in the Gospel of John. It can empower our faith to overcome doubt and lead us further to God, but how quickly we can fall away from God, so clearly portrayed in the Israelites, through the Israelites in the wilderness in the book of Exodus, right? We see with our own human fleshly eyes the work of God, and it can bring such a stirring of faith and justice in us, but it so quickly can fall away. And so hearing and seeing what he did in Jerusalem has brought them to an area in their lives where they can have their hearts softened to hear the message, but that does not always convert to a decision to follow God. This is a very, very strange mystery, and perhaps leads us to not see the miraculous day to day. How much more so, it says in John 20:29, because you've seen me, you've believed, but blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed. Very important distinction there. And that is not at all to downplay the miraculous, and I believe that the miraculous still happens today. I am not disregarding that or trying to limit that, but our faith should not be based solely on what we can see or what God has done for us physically, emotionally, spiritually, etc., right? God is still good even if he doesn't solve your problem or answer your prayer. And I think that sort of faith is what we need in these last days. So Jesus came again to Cana of Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And there was a certain nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum. We aren't exactly sure where Cana is. I think we discussed that a little bit in chapter 2. But we see Jesus return to Galilee, and we can extrapolate from this the news about the miracle he completed at the wedding, even though probably a few months, if not a year before this now, has spread across the region. Very interesting. And it's also interesting now that this second miracle in Galilee that will be performed, even though it's across a wide breadth of space, reflects back on the miracle that he completed at the wedding. Capernaum, just so you know, a relatively large city in the area, sat on the Sea of Galilee. So this nobleman, we aren't really sure if he's Jewish or Roman. We see in Isaiah through that prophecy that we see it called Galilee of the Gentiles. So I err more on the side that this could be a Roman, but it's not specific. When he heard, that is, the nobleman heard that Jesus had come out of Judea into Galilee, he went to him and implored him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. This early into Jesus' ministry, there is a general knowledge in Galilee, if not the entirety of Judea, that Jesus is a worker of miracles. In the Jewish context, which is what we have to think about when we're reading the work of Jesus, this already places Jesus as at least a prophet of significant magnitude. And the fact that he was not presented by the Sanhedrin, that is, he is acting independently of the ruling authority, is one of the major reasons that his claim of authority is so stark and at the same time so appealing, right? He did not have the backing of the elite. And the reason I say that is he doesn't bring people closer to a religious organization in order to abstractly show them God. He wants to establish that relationship directly with his people. We have outsourced so much of our faith and our evangelism to church. And church is a great thing, but it is not the job of your pastor to save your friends and family. It is your job to follow the example of Jesus in developing relationships, to provide your testimony and preach to people directly, instead of to bring them to a religious organization. Anyway, sidetracked. But Jesus says to this nobleman who, if he is Roman, I think this makes it even more interesting that this Roman comes to this Jewish rabbi and says, look, I've heard what you've done. You need to come see my son. I don't know what else to do. There's this sense of desperation. And Jesus said to him, unless you people see signs and wonders, you will by no means believe. So Jesus' answer ties into what we've discussed at length now, right? It confirms that this vision of seeing signs and wonders is a weak source of belief. It contrasts the faith of the Samaritans, who believed without a sign, just based on the testimony of this woman, who was an outcast, to now, Jewish, Roman, whatever, the Jewish community in this area. Very interesting. So the nobleman says, sir, come down before my child dies. He is desperate, right? There's this, he is open to faith because he admits he can do nothing about the given situation. People oftentimes get so hung up on, why does God allow evil in the world, right? Why do all these bad things happen? And I think that there's at least a partial answer in that by saying that we are most open to softening our hearts and being open to what Jesus wants to do, and that is to build a relationship with us when we come to a place of desperation and admitting that we don't have the answers. And that's where we see this nobleman with a sick child, which, although I don't have children, I can say that few problems can make us feel more helpless than sickness in a loved one. Maybe you felt that helplessness in moments of your own life, but it's in those moments that we can most manifestly surrender everything to Jesus and see him work. So Jesus says to him, go your way, your son lives. So it's amazing the compassion that Jesus has, because he's just said, like, you people aren't going to believe unless you see signs and wonders, basically saying, like, your faith is so weak. And yet he looks at this nobleman and has compassion on him anyway. And the important crux of this, the man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him, and he went his way. So, does the man believe Jesus through faith, or only believe him through what he can see with his own eyes? Does he believe the material, the science, the abstract, the physicality of Jesus touching his son? Or will he believe Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life, the way that he presents himself to him? The answer is that he believed Jesus. He exchanged the currency of faith, that is belief, the same belief that credits us righteousness through accepting the free gift of salvation. And he walks away and returns home. And as he was going down, his servants met him and told him, saying, your son lives. So the man doesn't just kind of have this emotional moment with Jesus and then kind of goes and does his own thing, and the belief stops. Because I think this is a perfect parallel to the way that we've watered down salvation to the American church, right? If you just, kind of come have this 30-second pseudo moment with Jesus, and you kind of cry and you say a few words and you feel guilty, okay, now you're good with God and you can go do whatever you want. No, that's the beginning of belief. The nobleman doesn't just believe for a moment, but he leaves Jesus, right? He thinks, and that is where the proof of his faith is shown. He believes that Jesus is the only one who can help him in this moment. And if he really thought that and his faith wasn't real, he wouldn't have left Jesus' side. He would have continued to bother him. I mean, I don't know a better word to use. But, excuse me, he goes his way toward home in an act of faith that his son may be healed. Now, let me say this, because I think the word of faith, and I say that toward televangelists, has made us skew this idea. Does this mean that he experienced no doubt whatsoever? I would say no. It doesn't mean that he had no doubt at all. And doubt can be brutal, and it can crumble your faith, but it can also help you rely more on Jesus and come closer to him by stating that you don't know what to do and you just need help to bring your questions to the Father. Does this mean that he held faith in Jesus as one who had the power to heal and over the body? Yes. That doesn't mean he didn't have any doubts, but he had faith in Jesus, that Jesus had the authority to do something, and he followed it to its natural conclusion, that is to listen to him. And may I add, this miracle doesn't just happen through a mindset change in the nobleman's psyche. It's not that he just believes Jesus abstractly. He obeys what Jesus tells him to. Right? We've convinced ourselves, we've watered down our faith so much, and it makes me so angry, that if we just sort of flip the light switch, that, oh yeah, Jesus can do that, and yet we don't practically take steps in obedience to what Jesus has told us, we get angry at God when nothing happens. We need to follow the example of this nobleman who came to Jesus in desperation, saying, I don't know what to do. You have the power to do something. Was told what to do, and then did it. That's just amazing. Absolutely amazing. So he inquires of them the hour when he got better, and they said to him, yesterday, about the 7th hour, basically confirming that this happened when Jesus said that it did. His curiosity is piqued by his faith. That is, once you see the power of faith and the loving embrace of Jesus, you necessarily are more interested in Jesus. Maybe not necessarily, but it opens the door, right? The physical, visual world can be used by God to bring you closer to an area where your heart is softened, like we talked about. But there's still that next step, and that is confirmed in these next few verses. Never let this skew into a view that the prosperity gospel is given that you become more obsessed with what Jesus can do for you rather than Jesus himself. Right? What else? He healed my kid. Okay, well then he can do this, 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 and this. And then all of a sudden we've divulged into a place where we're asking for Cadillacs more than we are about our neighbors being saved. This miracle confirms that Jesus' miracles were not some obscure sleight of hand, but that the true power of God was on display across time and space. But again, we can't make the hope of our faith in what Jesus can do for us. I see so many believers that their faith is entirely dependent on what God is doing in their life at the time. And we need to remind ourselves that sometimes God is silent. Sometimes God isn't going to do what you asked. Sometimes God isn't going to do that miracle. And instead of getting angry, we need to humble ourselves and understand what God spoke of in the final discourse in Job. Like, where were you when the world was created? Where were you when I formed man in the earth? How dare we ask these questions? Not that God is unable to accept our questions and our fear and our anger, but that we need to humble ourselves under the mighty hand of God and be grateful that he's provided anything at all. So the father knew that it was at the same hour in which Jesus said to him, "Your son lives." And it's so important. He himself believed, and his whole household. Faith that Jesus had the power to heal his son served as the cornerstone for the man's belief in being saved, and then his whole household. We've seen faith as the cornerstone now in both the Samaritan woman and the nobleman from Capernaum. And I want to say, his whole household was saved. That is not saying that because he was saved all of a sudden, the rest of his household was saved. But I do think that it is so often determined by the Father. That is, if a godly man can take the mantle laid before him to follow Christ, often his family will follow in accepting personal salvation. So we end chapter 4 stating, "This again is the second sign Jesus did when he had come out of Judea into Galilee." Jesus, through the miracles already laid out in these 4 chapters, has taken authority over the physical world, the body, and the lowercase r religious, the religious system. We end chapter 4 about a fifth of the way through the Gospel of John with an already miraculously depicted image of Jesus and the great works that he's accomplished. So short into his ministry, right? I mean, we've barely scratched the surface. And as we further explore his main body of work in Galilee, I pray that you would open your heart for all that he wants to speak to you. I know the principles are short this week, but this goes without saying. Don't ever expect to be accepted by non-believers. I don't know where this has come from, but I see so many churches and youth groups and pastors doing everything they can to be accepted by the world system. And that is not what we've been called to. Jesus has told us that we will have no honor in our home country, whether that's in our city, in our school, in our family, right? That means different things to every person. But we will never be accepted by everyone, and certainly by non-believers. And we should take heart in that, right? Jesus understood that, and he experienced that in his own family for a time, and certainly in his geographic region. So Jesus understands that rejection and tells us to take heart and keep going. And finally, belief is everything, right? Belief as the currency of faith, as the opening and the ending of our faith, in acting as something we can cling to. We will face challenges, we will face tribulation, we will face doubts, as I no doubt know that the nobleman did. But as long as we have belief, and belief that leads us to obedience, to action, not just to mental belief, we will finish the race that God has set before us. Thank you for your patience in this short break we've had. I hope to pick up the pace once again as summer grinds its way through the disgusting North Carolina humidity. I look forward to seeing you next time to begin John chapter 5.